Who are we covering today?
I guess Augustus is anxious to get right into our normal conversation.
I'm just curious. I have no idea. They don't tell me these things.
So as we noted, we are discussing Daphne Oram today. Yeah, kind of a big one. Someone that is considered the godmother of electronic music.
The founder of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
We thought we knew a lot about her already, but obviously
I mean, a lot.
We've been digging more and just getting a lot more new anecdotes and things. Daphne Oram is a name you've never heard. That excites us because we love to share new things to people.
If we have the opportunity to enlighten you to her existence.
Yeah, we think you're going to really dig it.
That would be great.
She is known as the founder of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which was sort of the answer to what was going on in Europe. Like we've discussed Pierre Schaeffer in Paris. We haven't touched on Stockhausen yet, but he was over in Germany. Doing things with tape music, experimenting. And so in England, they started the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Well, let's talk a little bit about like the backstory there.
About how she started it?
She pretty much, There's
so many angles that we could start from, so.
Early life. Apparently, from when she was 7 years old, she could visualize sound.
Yes.
She was into,
very gifted child, very interested in sound.
She said that someday there would be a way for her to create the sound that she visualizes.
That she would be able to draw it. I'm pretty sure she was very specific at age 7. This is the anecdote that she told her father one day she would build a machine that she could draw and it would make sound. She must have had this way of experiencing sound that was visual, that she was like, I know if I could communicate sound visually, this would be...
We won't spoil that part, because, so that's just an idea. That was a thought that she had when she was 7. Whether or not it actually happened is yet to be discussed.
And, I'd like to just point on that she was born in 1925, so between the two world wars. So she was an adult during World War II. And a lot of the people that we've talked about were involved some way in the war effort, and that's how they got into telecommunications or radio or electronic music, was by being exposed to the tools, the tubes, and what have you. And the technology, the education was through the military. And she has a similar trajectory, but she was born a little bit earlier than some of the people we've discussed. Well, maybe right in the middle.
Well, hence her founding status.
But it's all kind of right around the same time.
So she studied music?
Yes.
And electronics?
That's what's said, that she studied music and electronics.
How formally, we don't know. Did she go to university?
That's something we want to look into. So part of the reason that we do these conversations is because we want to spark conversation. We know some things, we've looked into some things, but we want to spend the week exploring more about it. Some questions are going to come up in this conversation. You may, present some questions that you have in the thread here, so that we can dig more into them together. It's more fun to do things together, we think.
Yeah, it's great to just sort of get everyone thinking about the same topic, a centralized topic, and then sort of experiencing this hive mind.
So in the few that we've done so far, I've found it to be really edifying and inspiring in our music making. So the deeper that we get, the more that we all share together, the more it kind of inspires me and makes me realize, I think it's helped me get inside of these people's minds more and their creative thought, rather than just this is when they were born, this is what we know, the highlights of their life.
It's already influenced me.
Or maybe some albums.
I've even made some gear choices based off of people that we've covered already.
Really
I've
changed some ideas for
synthesizer
us.
modules out.
So if it's done that for you, we'd love to know. Because we're always trying things, testing things out, seeing what works, what connects. What speaks to people, what inspires you. If it speaks to us, we figure it probably, connects with most people too, if it hits at a deep level. So yes, obviously we were talking about, her early life, that she was always interested in music. That seems to be a theme as well. These people don't just one day wake up and go, yeah, I guess I'll get into electronic music.
Right.
They were like early on exposed to it, early on being educated in it, going to school for composition, things like that.
Well, going back to the war, it was said that because of, the fact that men were called off to war,
Oh yeah, this is a fun
she
anecdote
was
as well.
able to wrangle a job as a balancing engineer. A balancing
Yes.
engineer.
Tell me more about being a balancing engineer. What does that even mean?
In the old days, I believe that it was kind of like you're mixing and mastering all in one. Before the advent of multi-track recording and tape, a balancing engineer was sort of the person responsible for getting the levels right that ultimately became the final recording, because that's really all you got, like one shot at it.
To it, yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't as much to it. Like, you might balance some levels, and then whatever medium you're recording it to, that's the way it's going to be. And so there was probably an art and a science to getting the levels right so that they came out recorded on the other side well. They wanted the final product to be a well balanced, delightful
for radio
result for radio. Yeah, and also there's probably some stipulations for creating something that was appropriate, sound level wise, for radio versus other mediums.
Yeah, radio was the thing of the time. So yeah, I do find it very interesting that she was able to get a job that she normally wouldn't have been able to get just because of the war, and that all the men were off at war. So it's actually here on her Wikipedia page, which I know we could all be reading together. Anyone can find that. But specifically about being a music balancer at the BBC, that one of her job responsibilities was shadowing live concerts with a pre-recorded version, so the broadcast would go on if interrupted by enemy action. So that's pretty nifty. I don't know why I used that word, but she did also create sound effects for radio shows and mixing broadcast levels. So that's
I'd say the majority of people's jobs were affected because of the war. I mean, they kind of had like the war version of their job.
Yeah, so this is 1942, 1943. So really, they're trying to keep life as normal as possible.
My mom was
prepare
alive.
for the worst. Oh, our first mom reference of today's broadcast.
Always got to bring her in there.
So,
She was alive and she was in England.
during this time when she's working at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, at BBC, at the radio, working as a music balancer, she became aware that, there were experiments being done with synthetic sound and tape recorders. So the real pivotal moment is when she was told that she was allowed to go and dig through sort of redundant equipment that was kind of in storage, and use it after hours and work on these ideas that she had.
Well, she really had to press for it.
Yeah.
She had to basically beg someone to let her use equipment when it was not being used.
Yeah.
Apparently she would use it and then return it
Yeah, that
perfectly.
was so crazy. She would put everything back. She would take things from
almost
all
like a
over
little-
the place. She would stay there all night, work on stuff. The tedious work of recording things to tape and splicing and looping and all that. She would do it all night and then put it back. And then go to work in the morning?
It reminds me of that story where the elves are in the shoe shop working all night, and then everything gets returned back to normal when the owner arrives.
Yeah, she's a little tape music elf.
Yeah.
Very magical. So she was pretty much on her own doing all of this, and she started the BBC Radiophonic Workshop because she was already doing all of this on her own with her. How did she get paired? Why was she considered to have started it not on her own, but she started it with Desmond Briscoe?
I believe so, yeah.
I'd be curious to know. That's the one thing that I don't know.
Yeah, I'm referencing...
How did Desmond Briscoe get involved?
This book, it's Tape Leaders by Ian Helliwell, a very good reference for all things British electronic music and tape music pioneers. But it says that through the dedication and support of Desmond Briscoe and sympathetic drama producers, the Radiophonic Workshop came into being in April of 1958.
I see. So it was started in 1958, and she needed...
This was the same year that
he sort of was like her sponsor. He sort of was like, all right, I'll vouch for her. We have an interest in this. I know that, the initial setup was to create, radio dramas. And I was just listening to what they consider the first radiophonic radio show or performance that was done. The Private Dreams and... What is it? Public Dreams and Private Nightmares. I need to find that. The sort of announcer, the guy who's presenting it, the voiceover, describes that, this is the first of its kind, and he's introducing it to the public who are listening, and he's sharing that, they didn't want to call it music, as they might call it in other parts of Europe where it's being experimented with. So that's why they called it radiophonics, because they thought it should specifically be used for radio dramas, where for this, performance, they did a poem that they used tape music to enhance the mood. So they were talking about how it's not necessarily for music and it's not necessarily for sound effects. It's something in between where it enhances the experience. It's kind of like a psychological perspective, where they thought, it does lend itself very easily to sort of spooky sounds and abrasive things. He mentioned horror and things like that. And they were interested in how
Sci-fi.
can they find a niche with tape music at the BBC, where it's more for subtle emotions, sadness, grief. We associate it a lot with like sort of a haunting, digging through memories and things like that, sort of a dream state. So Daphne was part of that initial project, that very first presentation. So I'm going to find, there's a YouTube of it where you can listen to the whole thing. So I'm going to find it.
So 1958 was the same year that she visited the Brussels World Fair, which apparently that was...
That's the famous Brussels World Fair with the Atomium, right?
Yeah, she heard electronic music from people overseas, I guess.
Oh, so that's where she was really exposed to Stockhausen and Schaefer.
She was also in regular contact with F.C. Judd, someone who
they did correspond.
I am sure that we will cover.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
He was another pioneer. Did a lot of circuit design and things to...
He was very enthusiastic about everyone having access to these technologies.
Created an early video synthesizer.
Yeah, that thing is really cool. So she was really connected with whoever the pioneers at the time were. She was in contact or she was aware of them. But I don't think that she had a lot of peers at home at the time. Not a lot of champions in her corner. She had a lot of pushback about what she was doing. And, after founding the BBC Radiophonic Workshop and doing these experiments, she actually didn't stay very long, which I find to be one of the more interesting aspects of her life.
We've discussed this a lot, because
it's really
apparently
fascinating.
she was only there for about 6 months.
Yeah, and there's a strange reason why that we want to learn more about. Was she forced out? So apparently there was a rule at the time that you could only be exposed to strange sounds for 6 months at a time, and then you had to go work in another department. And then I guess, 6 months on, 6 months off? I'm not sure the exact timeline. But you weren't allowed to spend more than 6 months around these strange electronic sounds. I don't know why they thought it was dangerous or what they thought was going to happen.
I get it, though. I mean, weird stuff, man.
I feel like I have so many questions about who made that rule up and why. Were they threatened by her? Was it, we didn't hear of anybody else having... I think she basically said she didn't want to work anywhere else at the BBC, so that's why she quit. And maybe other people did do their rotations, and so you don't hear about it because they didn't quit. But she basically said, I don't want to work anywhere else. I started this. I want to stay here. So she left, and she founded a electronic studio in her house. She moved to Kent, and she founded what they say is probably the first electronic music studio in Britain. And
aside from the radio,
it really was just, a house that she lived in, and she had, I think, chickens and goats and cats, and apparently she had a lovely garden, and she cooked and worked on what the next chapter of her life is, and what her real legacy is beyond the radiophonic workshop is the Oramix machine, that famous machine that she told her father she would make one day.
Right. And I find that interesting that, we've discussed many of these electronic music pioneers, and a lot of them seem to have this one machine. Like you've got your Totos, you've got your
Tontos.
Tontos, sorry.
For a second I was like, wait, is that something I don't know about?
Your Electroniums.
Yes.
Like your, what's the
your
one
Troutoniums.
Your Troutoniums.
Your Theremins.
So, this was her machine, like she had.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. I found a bunch of little short videos on Vimeo that someone made about the Oramix machine that are some of the best ones I've seen so far. So I'm going to share some of those because they get really up close on the machine. So this was her dream come to life. She got some grants, apparently. Well, does it say in the book who those grants were from? She got some pretty hefty grants to build this machine. And just, that's all she did. She had demonstrations, I think on the weekends, it said. She would, people like, most of the people we know from the radiophonic workshop would come out and kind of get the demonstration of the machine. And it was always being worked on.
It was rumored that Mick Jagger and somebody from the Beatles, maybe George Harrison or somebody like that, might have checked it out.
Some young blokes from Liverpool is what they said.
And one
came
from
in like 1960. Came to her
from.
house to check it out. It was very cutting edge, but still pretty underground.
I don't see where the grants came from.
Well, she had received a couple grants to work on the Oramix machine. With the expectation, I think, that it was going to be, functional within a few years and be this big breakthrough in technology that they could then develop further. But it turns out that she spent her whole life working on it and then just kind of gave up, in the 70s.
She gave up and she switched to Apple.
She did. She switched to Apple computers in, I guess, the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she realized that what her dream
these videos
was probably possible with the computer, probably in a much more viable, way, I guess, that, than it would be with these, hand-drawn machines on film and light and mechanical, device, versus a computer that, at the time, I think even with, it says she used the Apple II, but I think even back then they had light pins, that was an accessory that you could have with the computer.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
And you could use that to, kind of draw a basic waveform, and you could get, the sound that you wanted that way. Speaking of that, now, if you've never checked out, there's a few programs that do it. I know Pro Tools does it, but Audacity, which I talk about from time to time, it's the free audio editor for Linux, PC, Mac. It's on all the platforms. It's open source. It's a really good audio editor. I pretty much use that, I would say, most of the time when I'm just recording audio or making samples and things. But what's really cool about it is you can actually draw in that program. If you wanted to, if you heard a sound, for example, in your mind, and you had a visual, picture of what that might look like, or you just have a shape that you want to hear what that would sound like, you could use that program to kind of like draw in with the mouse like a rough version of that shape, and then you'd actually get to hear it. Like you like hit play and it plays back the sound of the shape.
She would be
it's pretty cool.
Pretty into that, I think.
So
I'm linking to that too.
The vision that she had, it's no surprise to me that she ended up going the computer route, because her vision, basically took that direction. Like there was never really a formal machine, like electromechanical machine that did this. It happened.
It never happened that way.
It never happened that way. It went, the computer was the winner in that race. But I'm one of these people that like, I love film, I love tape, I love these, electromechanical processes, I love analog, so I always have these like crazy dreams where, like what if, the technology of like the 60s and 70s had just been continued,
instead of
even though they weren't practical. Like what if the same effort
the amount
would have been put into, if aliens came and
oh no, it has to involve aliens.
and put the same effort that showed us all these devices, that they put the same effort we put into computers, but in keeping analog moving forward, like what kind of stuff would we have come up with? And I think that the Oramix machine would have been one of those kind of devices where we would be doing these elaborate film art, visual art turning into sound type projects. I feel like it
is very unique. I don't know if there's anyone who was doing something similar. That's going to be a question that I have.
I do believe that we have shared stuff. Wasn't there?
Well, there was a group of Soviet pioneers who were drawing on film back in, I want to say, the 20s.
Yeah, early on.
Very early on, and that was really cool. But this is something a little bit different, because she's drawing, but she's also building the machine to generate the sound.
Oh, I see. So it had sort of like a custom sound generation device that specifically went along, because they were using standard film projectors to read, because like a sound film projector, for example, reads sort of like a drawing, or a wave shape that's recorded onto sound film, onto a magnetic strip. So it's like oxide. I think it's the same technology as tape is used for that process. But I was going to say, if it was in the 20s, like there was a lot more experimentation with like electromechanical means for people were trying to figure out what was going to be basically tape.
Because they were using there was a lot of experimentation specifically at that time
to try to figure out what the best way
techniques, machines that were
to
very
record
dangerous
sound, and wire recorders and oil cans and
there were very proprietary things that never developed into what we have now. It just kind of went to tape. I've sort of lost the thread of what I wanted to go to next. I got so excited about what we were talking about. Oh, was anybody else doing this at the time? So we're going to look into that. But her machine was really homemade. There is a video that I shared of the people who kind of got it out of storage. I think it was in like a house somewhere in France.
Well, yeah, and they did an art expedition, right?
Yeah, they at a museum, they curated this, I think it was
they involved all the heavy hitters.
2011. They brought everybody back to like figure out what the
Peter Zinoviev,
what the piece should be about.
Brian Hodgson.
Yelling out people's names. All the heavy hitters were involved. But her machine was in complete disrepair, covered in cobwebs. If you watch the clip, which I highly recommend, it's not very long, you'll see that it almost looks like it's taped together. Like, how did this thing work at all? It looks like it never worked. And I heard one of the curators say that there's no possible way to restore it because anything they do using stuff we have now would make it not what it was. It would no longer be the Oramix machine.
Was it tube based?
Yes.
Gotcha, that's why.
But also it's because there are notes that she left behind, but we're not inside her head. It was very much what was inside her head was what this machine was, and it doesn't make much sense, and we don't really know what was going on.
The little that I know about tubes, like the whole deal with tubes is that like if she referenced certain types of tubes, there are tubes that used to exist that would allow you to do certain functions that there literally isn't like a solid state replacement for. So like if she referenced using a tube in a certain way, there's literally no way that you can like recreate those same series of actions with something that's available now. So it's like, and then that would screw up the whole logic of the circuit kind of thing. Like, so it makes sense to me how it wouldn't be possible, to recreate some of those ideas.
It's also just, it was always being fiddled with. She was always trying out some other adaptation on it. So it's hard to know what version would we have now to even recreate or to fix. So it's really just sort of a piece of history that is non-functional, that just is going to sit in a museum, which I think is a good thing because there is a lot to discuss about it. And I'm glad that they found it and that we can see, like, her handwriting is on it and things like that.
It's a very
But
cool
yeah, she just
bit,
fiddled with it all day, every day, her entire life, just on this machine. She did do work for commercials and films. So after she left,
kept going.
Yeah, after she left the radiophonic workshop, she did get work using, I assume she was using the Oramix machine to make the music, but she might have been, doing things with just tape.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a pretty decent amount of...
Yeah, she had it set up as an electronic music studio.
Recorded works.
She was able to get work doing commercials. Like we said, she got grants. She did a film, which was pretty famous. I'm finding this interesting bit here about her film work, that she did make electronic sounds for things that were used in like James Bond films and stuff, but she was never credited. She added sounds to the soundtrack of Snow, which was a short documentary made in 1963. And then she did work with that same director again, and she is credited for the electronic treatment of music for a film called Rail in 1967. I've heard that she did make a movie that was a pretty big deal with Deborah Kerr in it.
Okay.
So she had these moments, I think, probably between 1960 and 1968, where she was doing Lego commercials and she was in adverts for tape machines and she was really cutting edge, and there were little mini documentaries about her on BBC promoting the Oramix machine. But then
I think she was sponsored by
Brunel.
Brunel. There's a lot of Brunel ads. They were
I love the Brunel ads.
A British tape machine company. Apparently that's the brand that the Beatles had at home.
Oh.
They were
considered the best.
Yeah, they were kind of like the Ampex of Great Britain.
Oh, okay.
I have like a permanent search, like a saved search engine thing for eBay for Brunel. And like nothing ever comes up. Yeah, nothing ever comes up. Like there's like literally an ad, like one of these like Daphne Oram ads will pop up every once in a while, or something like that. But they're very rare, especially in this country. I bet you in England
they're very cool looking too. I'm gonna try to find.
But they were sort of the go-to brand of tape machine for musique concrète in the UK and. Any sort of tape editing.
Probably share some of those photos.
But I guess they had a pretty cool feature set. So
she did have a lot of support. There was a lot of enthusiasm around her ideas, and I think she was also really good at selling them and sounding very you're going to want to get in on this. I'm an expert. This is, she talked with a lot of authority about it. Whenever I listened to her, she was very certain that this is what she was going to do. It was going to be successful.
Yeah, and she had been visualizing it since she was 7 years old. So I'm sure she was speaking from full confidence by the time a lot of it was coming to be.
Oh, this is what it is. Jack Clayton's horror film, The Innocents. That's 1961. That's the one that was really big deal. If anybody's seen that, we have not.
We'll have to check that one out.
But yeah, she did a lot of work. Okay, so in 1962, she was awarded a grant that's equivalent to £76,000 today from the Gulbenkian Foundation.
Gulbenkian, that's right.
To create the Oramic system. And then she got another one a couple years later. That was probably, I don't know, they don't say how much that one was worth, but close to probably £80,000 today. And cool. I think it's said that they were pretty bummed. They were pretty bummed that she didn't finish it and that it wasn't something that could be, I guess mass produced. And then there was a software version, like we were saying, in the 1980s that she worked on with another grant.
Did that one come to fruition?
I don't know. Did her software version come to fruition? That's a good question.
I would say that there's probably a much higher chance than it did. Knowing what.
It sounds like though she did fall ill around that same time and then just kind of never recovered. She lived till 2003 though.
Right. Yeah.
But she was kind of sick that whole time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in the 90s she had a couple strokes and she didn't really recover, so
she wasn't working like hard in her later years.
Correct.
She just kind of...
And that's why the Oramics machine, so if she stopped in like 1979, let's say, it kind of went into like a shed and collected dust while she worked on the software version, and then that didn't go anywhere, or we'll find out more about that throughout the week.
Right.
And it was just kind of like went to nothing. And so we're like archaeologists, digging it up, putting all the pieces back together, because it's really fascinating, these really creative kind of one-off endeavors that people were doing all around the world kind of at the same time.
She seems like somebody that, from what I gather, she had a lot of short spurts. Like she was like a sprinter. Like she would get really far really fast with things and then
move on,
and things would sort of fizzle out, which I've found is kind of like a common thread with creative types. I'm
really also interested in her work, which I'm not really seeing here. I need to look more into the work that she did in schools. So I'd love to connect with some people who had that experience and how it affected them, if it got them into electronic music or if it just freaked them out. But she went and did these programs in schools.
I know she connected with Janet Beat, who we've talked about on the show before, who was Scottish, British originally, but moved
ended up in Scotland.
To Scotland and worked in the educational system for music and electronic music there. And I think that there's reference in this book here of her, and so she definitely connected with Daphne throughout her career.
So she had a lot of how cool to be alive at that time and to have all those relationships, like
right.
Writing with FC Judd and like doing educational stuff with Janet Beat. That is so cool. And all the guys at the workshop who feel like she really mentored them and guided them.
Well, I think what would happen was anytime they ran into something that, if she was probably like an adjunct problem solver of things that they would encounter, at the workshop. Like I have a feeling she wasn't ever really completely out of contact with them.
Yeah, they would
even
go
though
visit
she didn't
her.
work
Apparently
there.
She made a very good vegetable soup.
Yeah. We've heard reports of her making an amazing vegetable soup, and that she was a true farm-minded, like garden.
Yeah, all the vegetables were from her garden.
Minded. We were listening to a radio show that was an interview with the band Broadcast. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but this band Broadcast And Johnny Trunk was doing the interview.
It was his show, yeah.
It was his show, and they played a Daphne Oram piece.
Probably 2007, I want to say.
Yeah, and they played a piece from Daphne Oram.
Yeah, if I can find that again.
Did in conjunction
That'll probably lead
with
me to the
people
full
an educational
the
institution.
full recording and to find out more about that work that she did. She also wrote a very important book, kind of like her thesis on all of this, called An Individual Note of Music, Sound, and Electronics. So this is her theories and such.
Should be reading that before I go to sleep instead of watching crappy television shows.
We all need our distractions right now.
And a lot of her songs,
musical.
so to speak, you could tell that the whole point of them were, and it just hit me that like I probably do that a lot too, but like they were almost like experiments in sound. Like you could tell that like if you listen to each piece, you're like, oh, well,
she was trying to do this, yeah.
She was really interested in the idea of like recording this band and seeing what would happen if she like sped up and slowed down the tape throughout their performance. Would it like create this different, vibe? It's almost like she would do music to explore certain techniques in the studio, which I think is kind of common with a lot of these types of artists as well. Like, they use making recorded bits that, we end up like worshiping as, the examples of their work. But their point in doing them was more from like a technical standpoint of like, how do I explore this one concept? I want to do a tape flange, like across an entire track, and that's what the whole sound piece is. But I'm just like, I love that song.
I'm grabbing what has become my favorite tune of hers called Bird of Parallax.
It's a very good one.
So I'm going to share that.
It's long too, right?
It is longer.
It's like
13 minutes. Somebody says on here, before Pink Floyd there was Daphne Oram, which is true technically.
Right.
But I'm going to share this one for listening. And enjoyment. But again, we'll be posting individual posts throughout the week, asking these questions, seeing what more we can find out, getting some listening experiments going. But we're just putting them in the thread here, sort of as a reference for ourselves to come back to. So yeah, her book is really cool, and I want to read that. And the cover is I really like it. But I think that's probably where we'll end for now on Daphne. And we'll obviously continue in the group throughout the week, unless you have any closing thoughts.
Not in particular.
I'm sure there's some stuff we missed that we'll talk about in the group this week. It's so much. We have so much fun doing all the research and finding out more and reading and watching the videos and
Well,
documentaries.
I guess my final note would be, that her work was like a never-ending ripple throughout electronic music as we know it. Like, she, not only did she found the Radiophonic Workshop, but the experiments and her sort of style, I mean, it's almost, one could almost say that she invented the techniques that they used, in the Radiophonic Workshop. Not necessarily that she invented tape editing, but she kind of like laid a foundation for how it was done. You know what I mean? Because she spoke with such authority.
How it was used with the radio programs and things like that.
And she spoke with such authority and was so confident in the way that she thought about sound that it was like she would sort of just like, do things and people would sort of like, that's how it's done. She kind of like set like a precedent.
They do, yeah, they say she's the godmother of electronic music.
Right. So, the fact that, she was that influential, that blows my mind. Like, to think that,
powerful.
Almost the whole point in our group, the Cosmic Tape Music Club, and, a lot of the techniques that we use with our music and everything, it would, who knows what it would, if it would even exist if it wasn't for Daphne Oram.
Yeah.
So, she's a heavy hitter.
She's a heavy hitter for sure.
Beyond
feels like a big thing to honor her. And
really comprehension in my...
to even, talk about her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.